So I'm going to get a little statistic heavy. So while doing so, I'm going to pass around some of the charts I'm going to be drawing from. So feel free to take a peek at those. The text of the talk with some annotations will be up on my website. I'm happy to give people that information at the end if they're interested in some of the things I spoke about and being able to draw from them for their own work. This talk is the result of 3 months of research, consisting of conversations and in-depth interviews with organizers, as well as active participation in various campaigns. I offer these reflections as a way of being accountable to those who have been the subjects of this research and to circulate these findings. By focusing on class in the Portland region, I will look at the concept of class in two distinct but complementary ways. From class as it was made by capital, to class in its own making. To use E.B. Thompson's apt phrase, from the making of the English working class. And to draw on this conception of class further, Thompson states in the preface, "By class I understand an historical phenomenon, unifying a number of disparate and seemingly unconnected events, both in the raw material of experience and in consciousness. I do not see class as a structure, not even as a category, but as something which in fact happens and can be shown to have happened in human relationships. It is these relationships that I will examine in partial and fragmented way in the remainder of this talk. I will begin with a quick theoretical interlude before touching on the rise of neoliberalism as the current regime of capitalism, and then quickly zoom in on Portland since 2008. Finally, I will attempt to provide a reading of current struggles circulating in the region. I humbly offer the following reflections as part of intervention into and to circulate these class struggles. In turning to a short theoretical interlude, I want to invoke the concept of class composition, which assists us in assessing the power of working class in its struggle against capitalism. Capitalism organizes the worker's ability to work, what Marx called labor power, in the production process. To accomplish this, capitalism externalizes the cost of reproduction of labor power and imposes unwaged work on women and gender nonconforming peoples, while the state educates, coordinates, and disciplines the workforce. Further, capital in the state captures the working class's productive and creative capacities and imposes wage work as the only means of survival. The relations of production, as they are imposed a regime of work, are referred to as the composition of capitalism. Then the working class, when it demands wage increases, wages for housework, lower costs of living, for welfare and basic income, and organizes against racialized, gendered, ageist, ableist, and other divisions in the working class, it politically recomposes itself. In turn, capital and the state attack this political composition and attempts to decompose it by inciting divisions within the class, moving jobs overseas, decreasing wages, and repressing unions, as well as other forms of working class organization. By examining political composition, we begin not just to see what the working class and poor peoples believe, their consciousness, but how they are struggling, surviving, and organizing. By expanding the boundaries of what the working class comes to include, all those who are resisting this imposition of work, be it waged or unwaged, those in the fields, factories, and workshops, along with prisons, barracks, and classrooms, on street corners, in bedrooms, in kitchens, are hence part of the working class. Under capitalism, survival is dependent on either accessing wages from capital or income from the state in the form of welfare. Massive unwaged work is hidden, gendered, and increasingly taking part in every moment of our lives. And accessing housing, land, and the means of survival are criminalized and limited. As long as capitalism exists, there will be class struggle. Hence, it is our task as revolutionaries and radicals to overthrow class divisions and create new unities between different sectors of the class. Next, I will turn to how the working class has been formed since the rise of neoliberalism. The present moment is the result of 40 years of class struggle in the United States and across the planet, with the working class on the losing end. Meaning, the working class has lost its position as a political force, and working peoples have seen real wages, standards of living, and power vis-a-vis the boss and capitalism decrease. In order to further our understanding of this past 40 years, as metrics of the class struggle, let me offer a few statistics on work stoppages, decrease in unionization, and stagnated wages. This section is not meant to be comprehensive, but rather provide a picture of the class as it has been formed by capital over this period. It can be said that the strike is the ultimate expression of working class power. But since the mid-1970s, there has been a remarkable decrease in work stoppages. In looking at the number of strikes involving 1,000 or more workers, there is a peak in 1952 with 470 strikes. then again in 69 and 72, with just over 400 strikes each year. Then we see a decline in frequency in the late 1970s when we witnessed 300 strikes in 77, 235 in 79. And since this period, the mass strike has never recovered its prominence in class struggle. Since 2008, there hasn't been more than 20 strikes a year involving 1,000 or more workers. And this is not just the number of strikes that we've actually seen decreasing. During this time period, both their extent and their efficiency, we see smaller, shorter strikes that have replaced larger workplace actions that we saw in the preceding period. While this can partially be attributed to the decrease in overall unionization of the workforce, which I'll address next, there are a number of other factors. Unions have abandoned strikes for negotiated settlements and transactional relationships with the rank and file, and most importantly, capital has responded by decentralizing the workplace, specializing tasks and isolating teams of workers in the process. Corporate franchising separates larger blocks of workers into disconnected units, and deindustrialization and outsourcing jobs overseas directly attacked the industries with the highest rate of unionization and worker militancy. With fewer workplace of 1,000 or more workers, fewer mass strikes are taking place. This period has been marked by a considerable decrease in the percentage of the workforce that is unionized, declining from over 25% in the late 70s to just under 15% in the year 2000. And since 2008 and the economic crisis, this has fallen steadily to 11.3% last year. Currently, public sector workers had a union membership rate more than 5 times higher than that of the private sector. Of course, it is the teachers' unions and other public sector unions that have come under the most scrutiny and attack by the state. Additionally, for just over 50% of the U.S. population, wages have stagnated for the past 40 years, while those at the top 5 and 10%, of course, have seen incredible gains. Additionally, the national poverty rate has remained between 10 and 15% since the mid-1960s. To those familiar with the inequality discourse circulating since Occupy, it should be no surprise that the poverty rate for Black and Hispanic peoples is twice that of whites. And while the women to men's earning ratio has improved, women and gender nonconforming peoples suffer poverty at far higher rates than cisgendered men. It is reflected in the Portland region as well, where those without an associate's or other college degree, real wages have decreased since 1980, and the lower 60% of the population has seen negative wage growth since 1990. Furthermore, between July 2011 and June 2012, Oregon's Bureau of Labor and Industry reported 1,320 claims of wage theft. This totals $3.7 million, mostly from agriculture, construction, and food service. And we can assume the actual number is actually many times higher, especially when considering those with precarious legal statuses and troubling accessing work in the first place, as these populations are less likely to register formal complaints against their employers. Currently in Monotma County, a third of residents cannot meet basic needs such as housing, food, clothing, transportation, and healthcare. And as with national statistics, folks in Portland who are Black, Hispanic, and Native American experience poverty at twice the rate of whites. Portland since 2008 has seen a remarkable increase in the cost of living in general and rental housing in particular. The region is going through a massive redevelopment that reflects the whims of the tech, creative, construction, and real estate industries. And of course, this redevelopment requires the muting of voices that made the city in the first place. The sweeping of the unhoused off the streets and displacement of people of color from the city's core. As the city redevelops, it is forming new urban frontiers, where those who are unproductive for these industries in particular, and capitalism in general, are displaced. This is clearly illustrated by the displacement of African Americans from the historically Black Albina district and unhoused peoples from downtown. Though, the working class and poor peoples of the region are not passive victims in this process. They are struggling in their everyday lives as well as in overt ways against this regime. It is to this matter that I will now turn. 15 Now, High Five, Portland Solidarity Network, and VOS are illustrative of a new phase in the wage struggle, as they focus their attention across the working class and on workers in small shops and often ignored sectors. Additionally, they are representative of new forms of worker organization that aren't welded to the union or male factory worker image that dominated previous eras of workers' struggle. These organizations are part of an attempt at launching a new workers' movement, and each exemplify how radicals and revolutionaries can directly engage with the working class and poor peoples of the region. At their best, these organizations seek to amplify working class needs and desires. And since each of these organizations will speak in a moment, I will leave my remarks on this matter here and scale up to the larger constellations of organizations and struggles in the region. As illustrated by my conversations with members of Right to Dream 2, Sisters of the Road, Oregon Dreamers, Bring Them Home, Northwest Youth Immigrant Alliance, and others, initiatives, organizations, and movements should be led by those most affected. Each of these initiatives amplifies the voices of those most affected, while providing the opportunity for participants to enter the political sphere and to participate in overt struggle. Further, the scope, scale, and meaning of who leads and who speaks needs to be addressed strategically by our movements, and I would suggest that such leadership should be maintained on a local level as to avoid representational structures that have limited and doomed prior movements. As reflected in my conversation with VOS and other organizations, leadership should be the first requirement of membership. Thus, many organizations of the region are made up of organizers, and efforts are being made to improve the latent talents of all those participating. Here, the long-standing division in the working class, and in workers' movements in particular, between formal and organic leadership is breaking down. In the midst of the foreclosure crisis, We Are Oregon, Hyphy, the Black Working Group, Portland Liberation Organizing Council, and others shifted the public discourse on foreclosures and channeled the energy of Occupy into home defense. By seizing such opportunities, these organizations served as an example on how deep relationships can be forged between different sectors of the class, even amidst crisis. As mentioned in many of my interviews, following Occupy, organizers are increasingly preparing for long-term organizing efforts. For the past 20 years, the Community Alliance of Tenants and Jobs with Justice have been working on behalf of tenant and worker rights, and in turn serving as anchors in these movements. Issues such as housing injustice, historical oppression, and access to the means of production and survival will require planning for the long haul. The Rural Organizing Project, Community and Postal Workers United, and United Farm Workers all illustrate how the borders of the city are porous, not just to commodities and capital that flow through the region, but to people and politics. The needs and desires of the working class and poor peoples of Portland are intimately connected to those in the region as a political, ecological, and productive machine. And to address one final point before concluding, history can provide a guide for those struggles that we aren't seeing in Portland in the contemporary moment. Four particularly come to mind. These are welfare rights, unemployed people's movements, waged domestic work, and unwaged work. Welfare rights and unemployed people's movements arose not just during the Great Depression, but in the early 1970s saw the development of the Welfare Rights Union, arguably the largest overt social movement in U.S. history to be led by women of color. During a time of unprecedented economic crisis, where precarious access to wage work, coupled with massive cuts to welfare, the struggles of unemployed, underemployed, and welfare recipients should be part of our conception of class struggle. New York, California, and other states, though not Oregon, have seen a rise of a hardy domestic workers' rights campaign. By demanding a domestic workers' bill of rights, these worker-led movements have brought legal protections to a sector of the workforce historically excluded from labor law. Additionally, when the state imposes austerity and cuts are made to child care and elder care, this work is heaped upon those who are already performing this work without a wage, this being predominantly women and gender nonconforming peoples. When our new wage struggle movements conceptualize their demands and attacks upon capital, voices from welfare rights, unemployed people's movements, waged domestic work, and unwaged work should complement our own. For it is when the political composition of the working class develops that the horizon of what is possible is pushed forward. The four organizations that will follow, 15 Now, High Five, Portland Solidarity Network, and VOS, articulate the one no as a scream. No one should make under $15 an hour, no wage theft, no stolen security deposits, and no slumlords. And these four organizations begin in low growls, wails, and howls, the many yeses of a world without the imposition of work, without capitalism the state, beyond oppression and imposed binaries, for the full body of the free association of production and reproduction that meets the needs and desires of the working class and poor peoples of the Portland region and across the planet.